1 month after the liberation, the galaxy was still in shock. News of Earth's victory had spread through every communication channel, every trading route, every whispered conversation on occupied worlds. The Valaran Empire had declared humans servants, and humans had responded by destroying an entire occupation fleet. Nothing like this had ever happened before. Sovereign Thalrix paced the floors of his palace, reading reports that grew worse by the day. The defeated Earth was not just a military failure. It was a crack in the foundation of everything the Empire had built. For 10,000 years, the Valarans had ruled through the belief that resistance was impossible. Now that belief was shattered. Ambassador Kevin Price sat across the negotiation table from Valaran representatives, and this time they were not laughing. They listened carefully to every word he said. They nodded respectfully. They called him by his proper title. The balance of power had shifted, and everyone knew it. President Grace Mitchell had sent Price to negotiate from a position that the Empire had never faced before. Earth was not asking for mercy. Earth was not begging for peace. Earth was stating terms, and the Empire would either accept them or face consequences. The terms were simple. The Valaran Empire would recognize Earth as a sovereign world, free from any claim of ownership or servitude. The Empire would release 3 species that had been enslaved for centuries, and the Empire would never again declare any species as servants without facing united opposition. Thalrix wanted to refuse. Every instinct in his ancient body screamed to send a larger fleet, a more powerful force, an unstoppable army to crush these defiant humans. But his advisors showed him the numbers. The Empire had already lost too many ships. Other subject species were growing restless. Another defeat could trigger rebellions across half the galaxy. The High Sovereign signed the treaty with hands that trembled slightly. He had ruled for 500 years and had never signed anything under pressure. But he had also never lost a war. There was a first time for everything. Captain Laura Bennett, now Admiral Bennett, watched the signing ceremony on a screen aboard her flagship. She had been given command of Earth's new defense fleet, a force that would grow larger with every passing year. The young officer who had counted the enemy ships during their first arrival had become the guardian of her entire species. Maya Torres stood beside her, wearing the uniform of Earth's new scientific division. Her shield-disrupting technology had changed the war, and now she was working on defenses that would protect humanity for generations. The young engineer who had noticed a flicker in enemy shields had become one of the most important scientists on Earth. But the most important changes were happening far from Earth. In the darkest corners of the Empire, delegations from 12 different species had contacted Earth in secret during the past month. They came from worlds that had been conquered centuries ago, species that had given up hope of ever being free. They had watched what humans did, and they wanted to know if it was possible for them to. Sergeant Daniel Brooks, now Colonel Brooks, met with representatives of a species called the Thrall in a hidden location. The Thrall had been enslaved for 2,000 years. Their children were taken at birth, their history erased, their culture nearly destroyed. But they had never forgotten what freedom meant. Their leader, a gray-skinned elder with tired eyes, asked Brooks a single question. Would humans help them? Brooks did not hesitate. He told them that humanity had not fought just for itself. They had fought because no species deserved to be enslaved. And now that Earth was free, they would help others achieve the same. President Mitchell addressed the galaxy 1 month after the liberation, her voice reaching every corner of explored space. She did not threaten. She did not boast. She simply stated what humanity believed. Every intelligent species had the right to freedom. Every people had the right to choose their own path. The era of empires treating lesser species as property was ending. A new age was beginning. High Sovereign Thalrix listened to the broadcast alone in his chambers. He understood what was happening. The humans had not just won a battle. They had started something that could not be stopped. Their victory was becoming a symbol, a light that other enslaved species would follow. His empire, which had stood for 10,000 years, was beginning to crack dot in the months that followed. Earth became something new in the galaxy. Not a conqueror, not an empire, but a beacon. Species that had suffered in silence for centuries began to find their voices. Secret resistance movements spread from world to world, sharing information through channels the Empire could not control. Kira Dawson led a new intelligence division that helped these movements grow. She trained agents from a dozen species, teaching them the techniques that had helped humanity survive and fight. Every skill she had learned pretending to serve the Valorans, she now taught to others. Dr. Hannah Cole built communication networks that connected resistance groups across the galaxy. The old radio frequencies that the Valorans had ignored became highways for hope, carrying messages of encouragement and plans for liberation. Lucas Perry trained pilots from species that had never been allowed to fly. He showed them that size and technology were not everything. The courage and skill could overcome any enemy. His students went home to their occupied worlds with new knowledge and new purpose. Ambassador Price met with representatives of the Empire one final time before they left Earth forever. Commander Zeth, who had survived the battle and been allowed to return home, stood before him with something in his eyes that looked almost like respect. Zeth asked Price one last question. What did humans want? They had won their freedom. They could have asked for territory, for resources, for power. Instead, they had asked for the release of other enslaved species. Why? Price considered his answer carefully. He told Zeth that humans had learned something important a long time ago. Freedom was not truly free unless it was shared. A people who stood by while others suffered would eventually find themselves suffering too. And a people who helped others achieve liberty would never stand alone. Zeth nodded slowly, understanding perhaps for the first time why the Empire had lost. The Valorans had built their civilization on separation and fear. Humans had built theirs on connection and trust. One approach created servants who dreamed of escape. The other created allies who would die for each other. 1 year after the liberation, the Thrall declared their independence. Their uprising lasted 3 weeks. Valoran forces sent to crush them found human advisors fighting alongside the rebels, teaching them tactics the Empire had never seen. The Thrall were the first. But they were not the last. Admiral Laura Bennett stood on the bridge of her flagship, watching stars stream past as she traveled toward another world that had asked for help. Behind her flew ships crewed by humans and Thrall and 4 other species that had broken free. She thought about the day when 300 Valoran ships had appeared in Earth's solar system, demanding submission. She thought about how terrified she had been, and how that fear had transformed into something stronger. Humanity had faced extinction and chosen to fight. They had won their freedom and chosen to share it. They had been underestimated by an empire that had never known defeat, and they had proven that free people could accomplish anything. The galaxy was changing. The empire was weakening. And at the center of it all, one small species from a small planet kept showing the universe what was possible. When anyone asked how humans had done the impossible, the answer was always the same. They had done it together. The night sky over Earth erupted with light as Lucas Perry's squadron reached the Valoran flagship. The massive ship hung in orbit like a mighty mountain, its weapons capable of destroying continents. But Lucas was not thinking about what it could do. He was thinking about what he was going to do to it. His finger found the trigger for Maya's device. A pulse of energy shot from his aircraft and struck the flagship shields. For 30 seconds, those shields flickered and died, leaving the bridge exposed to the stars. Lucas fired everything he had. The flagship shuddered as explosions tore through its command section. Lucas saw fire blooming in the darkness, and then he was past, pulling away as the other ships in the fleet began to respond. Behind him, the flagship listed to one side, its communications array destroyed, its bridge in flames. Commander Zeth was not on the bridge when the attack came. He was 3 decks below, trying to understand why his communications were not working. The explosion threw him against a wall and left his ears ringing. By the time he reached the command center, it no longer existed. Around him, officers shouted in confusion. No one knew what was happening. No one could reach the other ships. The flagship, pride of the Valoran fleet, was blind and burning. On the surface of Earth, the attack had already begun. Sergeant Daniel Brooks led his forces through the streets of the capital, striking Valoran positions that had no warning of what was coming. The enemy soldiers reached for their weapons, but their shields failed the moment they tried to activate them. Maya's devices were everywhere. Every human unit carried them. Every Valoran soldier who tried to use their shield technology found themselves suddenly vulnerable. The Empire's greatest advantage had vanished in a single night. The fighting was intense but short. Valoran soldiers were trained to rely on their shields. Without them, they did not know how to react. Human forces moved through their positions like water through sand, overwhelming them before they could organize a defense. Dr. Hannah Cole coordinated the attack from her hidden command center, tracking reports from across the globe. Every city was engaged. Every resistance cell was fighting. The Valorans were being hit everywhere at once, and they had no way to coordinate a response. Captain Laura Bennett commanded Earth's hidden fleet as it emerged from concealment behind the moon. 30 ships that the Valorans did not know existed rose into battle, formation, and accelerated toward the enemy fleet. Valoran commanders were still trying to understand what had happened to the flagship when Laura's ships opened fire. The battle in orbit became chaos as human vessels wove between the larger Valoran warships, striking at weak points that Kira Dawson's intelligence had revealed. High Sovereign Thalrix received the first reports in his palace, thousands of light years away. He did not believe them. He demanded confirmation, then demanded different confirmation when the first reports proved accurate. His servant species was attacking. His fleet was in trouble. His soldiers were dying. This was impossible. The Valorans had conquered hundreds of worlds. No species had ever resisted successfully. These humans were supposed to be weak, primitive, easy to control. What was happening? In the capital, Administrator Vexus found himself surrounded by human soldiers in what had been his office. He raised his hands in surrender, his face showing the first real emotion humans had ever seen from him: fear. Sergeant Brooks stood before him, weapon lowered but ready. He asked the administrator a simple question. Did he understand now? Vexus did not answer. He could not. Everything he believed about humans, about the natural order of the galaxy, was crashing down around him. These were not servants. These had never been servants. They had been pretending from the very first day. Commander Zeth rallied what remained of his ground forces in a defensive position near the spaceport. If they could hold until reinforcements arrived, they might survive. He barked orders, trying to restore discipline to soldiers who had never faced real opposition. But the reinforcements were not coming. The fleet in orbit was too busy fighting for its own survival. Laura Bennett's ships had destroyed 3 Valoran warships and damaged a dozen more. The Empire's wall of steel was crumbling. Lucas Perry flew mission after mission that night, his squadron reduced by half but still fighting. Every time a Valoran ship tried to position itself for an orbital bombardment of Earth, human vessels blocked its path. The planet below was protected by pilots who refused to give up. By the time the sun began to rise, the battle was decided. Valoran ground forces had surrendered across most of the planet. Their fleet, what remained of it, was surrounded by human ships with weapons locked on target. Commander Zeth stood in the ruins of his command post, looking at the human soldiers who had come to accept his surrender. He had led conquest fleets across a dozen worlds. He had never lost. Until now, he asked Sergeant Brooks how they had done it. How had they coordinated so perfectly without the Empire detecting anything? How had they kept their plans secret for so long? Brooks smiled slightly before answering. He told Zeth that they had talked to each other. They had shared information freely, trusted each other completely, and worked together as one species. The Empire controlled its subjects by keeping them separated and afraid. Humans were neither. Zeth looked at the soldiers around him, seeing something in their eyes that he had never seen in any conquered species. They were not fighting because they were told to. They were not obeying orders from distant masters. They were fighting because they had chosen to. Together, the sun rose fully over the capital as Valoran soldiers laid down their weapons. Human crowds emerged from shelters, looking up at a sky that belonged to them again. Some wept, some cheered. Most simply held each other, unable to believe what they had accomplished. Captain Laura Bennett watched the sunrise from her bridge in orbit, her fleet forming a protective ring around their planet. Her crew was exhausted, her ships damaged, but they had won. Earth was free. President Mitchell addressed the planet that morning, her voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks. She spoke of the brave souls who had given everything, of the unity that had made victory possible, and of the future they would build together. But the fight was not over. The Valoran Empire still existed. High Sovereign Thaurix still ruled 200 star systems. And now the galaxy knew something that it had never known before. Humanity could not be conquered. 2 weeks into the occupation, the Valorans had grown comfortable. Their soldiers walked through human cities without concern. Their administrators complained about slow progress, but expected eventual success. Commander Zeth filed reports describing a species, gradually accepting its fate. They had no idea that every human who smiled at them was counting down the hours. President Grace. Mitchell sat in a secure bunker deep beneath the mountains, surrounded by screens showing feeds from around the world. Resistance leaders from every nation appeared on those screens, their faces tense but determined. Tonight they would make the decision that would change everything. The Valorans had announced that transport ships would arrive in 3 days. Humans would begin leaving Earth for labor assignments across the Empire. Families would be separated. Children would be taken. There would be no coming back. This announcement forced their hand. They could not wait any longer. In 3 days, humans would be scattered across the galaxy, too far apart to ever fight back together. If they were going to act, it had to be now. Kira Dawson sat in the corner of the bunker, still wearing the uniform of a Valoran translator. She had spent 2 weeks inside Commander Zeth's headquarters, listening, learning, and memorizing everything she heard. The intelligence she had gathered would make the difference between victory and defeat. The Valoran fleet had weaknesses. Their ships needed time to charge their main weapons. Their shields drew power from a central core that could be disrupted. Their soldiers relied on personal shields and rarely wore additional armor. Take away those shields, and they became vulnerable. Lucas Perry stood in an underground hangar 300 miles away, looking at the aircraft hidden there. He was 32 years old and had been flying since he could walk. Tomorrow he would lead the first strike against the Valoran flagship. He might not survive, but that was not the point. The point was giving humanity a chance. Maya Torres had worked without sleep for 48 hours, producing as many shield-disrupting devices as possible. Her small laboratory had become a factory, with volunteers assembling components around the clock. They had enough devices now. They had to be enough. Commander Zeth noticed something strange that afternoon. The humans seemed different. Their smiles were the same, their cooperation unchanged, but something in their eyes had shifted. He could not explain what it was, but it made him uncomfortable. He ordered increased surveillance, more patrols in the cities, more monitoring of communications. But the Valorans were looking in the wrong places. They scanned modern networks and watched main roads. They did not think to check the old radio frequencies or the tunnels beneath the streets. Kira Dawson knew she was running out of time. Zeth had begun looking at her with suspicion, asking questions about her background that were harder to answer. She needed to get out before he connected the pieces. She made her move during a shift change, slipping away from headquarters with a data device hidden in her clothing. The information on that device contained Valoran patrol schedules, ship positions, and command codes. It was worth more than gold, but someone saw her leave. An alarm sounded as she reached the street. Valoran soldiers poured out of the building, searching for the spy they knew must exist. Kira ran through alleys and side streets, her heart pounding, knowing that capture meant death. Sergeant Daniel Brooks had a team waiting 3 blocks away. They pulled Kira into a hidden entrance and closed the door just as Valoran soldiers rounded the corner. She pressed the data device into his hands, gasping for breath. The information reached President Mitchell within the hour. Now they knew exactly where every Valoran ship would be. Now they knew how to hit them where it hurt most. Lucas Perry received his final orders that evening. His squadron would launch at midnight, using Maya's devices to disable the flagship shields, then strike at the bridge where Commander Zeth would be sleeping. If they succeeded, the Valoran command structure would be thrown into chaos. Ground forces prepared in cities around the world. Soldiers checked weapons that had been hidden for weeks. Civilians who had trained in secret reviewed their assignments. Everyone knew the signal they were waiting for. At 11 o'clock, President Mitchell addressed the resistance leaders one final time. She did not give a long speech. There was no need for one. Everyone knew what was at stake and what they were fighting for. She simply said 3 words. For our children. At exactly midnight, every light on Earth went dark. Power stations shut down simultaneously in a coordinated blackout that left the planet in total darkness. The Valorans looked up in confusion as cities vanished into shadow. For exactly 10 seconds, Earth was silent and dark. Then the lights came back on. Commander Zeth knew immediately that something was wrong. The blackout was too perfect, too coordinated to be an accident. He reached for his communication device to order a full alert, but static filled the channel. Across the planet, humans looked at each other in the sudden light and understood. The signal had been given. The waiting was over. In the underground hangar, Lucas Perry climbed into his aircraft and started the engines. His squadron followed, 12 pilots who knew they might not see another sunrise. They accelerated through a hidden tunnel and burst into the night sky, climbing toward the stars. Sergeant Daniel Brooks checked his weapon one final time and gave the order to move. Thousands of soldiers emerged from hiding places across the capital, converging on Valoran positions from every direction. Dr. Hannah Cole watched the hidden network light up with reports. Every city was moving. Every cell was activating. The largest coordinated attack in human history had begun. President Mitchell stood alone in her bunker, watching the screens fill with movement and fire. She thought of her grandchildren, asleep in a shelter somewhere, unaware of what their grandmother had ordered tonight. She had sent humanity to war against an empire that had never known defeat. If they failed, there would be no second chance. The Valorans would destroy them all, but if they succeeded, the galaxy would never forget this night. Above the planet, Lucas Perry and his squadron broke through the clouds and saw the Valoran fleet spread before them like a wall of steel and light. The flagship hung in the center, massive and terrible. Lucas armed his weapons, felt the shield-disrupting device humming against his hull, and pushed his throttle forward. Time to show the Empire what humans were made of. 3 days after the decree, Valoran administrators landed on Earth expecting fear. They found something else entirely. Humans smiled at them. Humans offered them refreshments. Humans asked polite questions about forms and procedures. It was not what the Empire was used to. Administrator Vexus stepped off his shuttle in the capital city and looked around with confusion. On other conquered worlds, the natives had wept or fled or fought. Here, a woman in a formal suit walked toward him with her hand extended in greeting. Dr. Hannah Cole was a scientist by training, but today she was playing a different role. She welcomed Vexus to Earth with warmth in her voice and led him to a meeting room filled with human officials. They had prepared documents, she explained. So many documents. Integration was complex, after all, and they wanted to do everything correctly. Vexus spent his first week on Earth drowning in paperwork. Every time he asked for one piece of information, humans provided 10. Every form he submitted was returned with requests for clarification. The bureaucracy was endless, and the humans seemed genuinely sorry about the delays. Commander Zeth grew frustrated as days passed without progress. He had conquered worlds in less time than this. Human cities should already be reorganized for labor. Human resources should already be cataloged. Instead, his administrators reported meetings, discussions, and an ocean of documents that never seemed to end. Sergeant Daniel Brooks watched the Valorans from a window across the street from their headquarters. He was officially on leave from the military, just another citizen going about his business. In reality, he was coordinating resistance cells across 6 continents. The communication network was Dr. Hannah Cole's design. While the Valorans monitored all modern signals, they ignored the old radio frequencies that humans had used a century ago. Why would they pay attention to such primitive technology? This blind spot became humanity's greatest advantage. Messages passed through hidden channels every night. Military equipment disappeared from bases before Valoran inspectors arrived. Weapons moved through tunnels and back roads. Entire factories were relocated underground. The Empire saw a cooperative species accepting its fate. They did not see what was happening beneath the surface. Maya Torres was 26 years old and worked as an engineer in a power facility outside the capital. When Valoran inspectors came to catalog Earth's energy resources, she was assigned to guide them. She smiled and answered their questions while her eyes studied their equipment. On the 3rd day of the inspection, Maya noticed something. The personal shields that every Valoran soldier wore flickered for a fraction of a second whenever they passed near a specific generator. It happened so fast that no one else caught it, but Maya did. She spent that night running calculations in her small apartment. The generators operated at a certain frequency. The shields flickered at that frequency. If she could build a device that projected that frequency in a concentrated burst, she might be able to disable Valoran shields entirely. Maya shared her discovery through the hidden network. Within days, scientists across the world were working on the problem. They communicated in code, met in secret, and never spoke of their work where Valoran ears might hear. The Empire announced new policies on the 10th day of occupation. Families would be separated for efficient labor distribution. Children would be placed in education centers to learn proper service to the Empire. Adults would be assigned to work crews based on their skills. This announcement changed everything. Humans had endured the insults. They had tolerated the inspections. But the thought of children taken from their parents crossed a line that no one could accept. The first protest happened outside of Valoran Administrative Center. It was not violent. People simply gathered and refused to move. Commander Zeth ordered them dispersed, but more arrived for everyone who left. By nightfall, similar gatherings had appeared in cities around the world. Zeth chose to make an example. He ordered his soldiers to arrest the leaders of the largest protest and bring them to the public square for punishment. The crowd would see what happened to those who disobeyed, and they would learn their place. But when the soldiers moved in, something unexpected happened. The crowd did not flee. They did not fight. They simply stood together, linking arms, making it impossible to reach anyone without pushing through thousands of people. Captain Lavra Bennett watched the scene from her ship in orbit. She had spent 2 weeks feeding false information to the Valorans, making them believe they had a complete picture of Earth's weapons. In reality, she had hidden half the fleet in locations the Empire had never scanned. The Valoran soldiers eventually retreated from the protest without making arrests. It was a small victory, but it mattered. For the first time, humans had stood together and the Empire had backed down. That night, the hidden network carried new messages. Underground factories had completed the first batch of shield-disrupting devices based on Maya's discovery. The weapons were small enough to mount on aircraft and powerful enough to leave Valoran soldiers exposed. Sergeant Daniel Brooks met with resistance leaders in a basement beneath an abandoned building. They spread maps across tables and planned in whispers. Every city had cells ready to move. Every military unit had secret orders waiting. Dr. Hannah Cole monitored Valoran communications with equipment she had built from spare parts. The Empire was getting comfortable. They believed the protests were the last gasp of a species accepting defeat. They had no idea what was actually happening. Administrator Vexus complained in his reports that humans were impossible to organize. They agreed to everything but accomplished nothing. Their systems were chaotic, their records incomplete, and their cooperation somehow produced endless confusion. Commander Zeth read these reports with growing unease. Something felt wrong, but he could not identify what. The humans smiled too much. They were too helpful. No conquered species had ever behaved this way. But the High Sovereign wanted results, not suspicions. Zeth pushed his concerns aside and focused on the work. The humans would fall in line eventually. They always did. In a small laboratory hidden beneath a university, Maya Torres held up a completed device and smiled. It fit in the palm of her hand and could disable Valoran shields for 30 seconds. 30 seconds was long enough. All across Earth, humans were preparing. They trained in secret, gathered supplies, and waited for a signal. The Empire thought they were weak. The Empire thought they were broken. The Empire was about to learn how wrong they were. The year was 2187, and Earth had changed forever in a single morning. Captain Lavra Bennett stood on the bridge of the horizon, Earth's finest diplomatic vessel, watching her screens fill with shapes that should not exist. 300 alien warships had appeared at the edge of the solar system, and they were not here to say hello. Lara had spent 20 years in space. She had seen asteroids the size of cities and storms on Jupiter that could swallow Earth whole. But nothing had prepared her for this. The alien ships were massive, each one larger than any human vessel ever built. They moved in perfect formation like a wall of metal and light pushing toward her home. Ambassador Kevin Price stood beside her, his face pale but his voice steady. He was a diplomat who had solved conflicts between nations, but this was something beyond any training. The aliens had not asked for a meeting. They had not sent greetings. They had sent a summons, demanding that Earth's leaders present themselves immediately. The message had come from the Valoran Empire, a civilization that ruled over 200 star systems. They had existed for 10,000 years, conquering and absorbing every species they encountered. To them, the galaxy was their garden, and every other race was either a tool or a weed. High Sovereign Thalrix appeared on every screen on Earth at exactly noon. He was tall and thin, with silver skin and eyes that held no warmth. His voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. As he spoke to humanity for the first time, humans were to be the newest servant species of the Valoran Empire. This was not a request. This was not a negotiation. Earth had 7 days to surrender all military assets, accept Valoran governance, and begin integration into the Empire's labor systems. Resistance would result in the destruction of human civilization. Lavra watched the broadcast with her crew in silence. Around the world, billions of people heard the same message. Some panicked. Some prayed. But many simply looked at each other with a question in their eyes. Who did these aliens think they were? Commander Zeth arrived 2 days later as the Valoran officer assigned to oversee human integration. He was shorter than Thalrix, but carried himself with the same arrogance. When Ambassador Price attempted to open diplomatic discussions, Zeth laughed in his face. Diplomacy, Zeth explained, was for equals. Humans were not equals. They were a young species on a small planet at the edge of the galaxy. The Valorans had conquered races far more advanced than humanity. This conversation was a courtesy, nothing more to demonstrate their power. The Valorans pointed one of their warships at a small, uninhabited moon near Jupiter. A single beam of light shot from the vessel, and the moon cracked apart like an egg. Billions of tons of rock scattered into space in seconds. The message was clear. Earth could share that fate. Lara watched the destruction from the horizon, her hands gripping the edge of her console until her knuckles turned white. Beside her, a young officer whispered what everyone was thinking. How could they fight something that could destroy moons? But Lara was not watching the destruction. She was watching the Valoran ships. She was watching how they moved, how long it took them to charge their weapons, how their formations shifted during the display. She was taking notes in her mind, storing every detail for later. Earth's united government met in emergency session that night. Leaders from every nation gathered to discuss their options. Surrender meant slavery for every human being. Resistance seemed impossible against such overwhelming force. The debate went in circles for hours. President Grace Mitchell listened to every argument before she spoke. She was a small woman with gray hair and steady eyes, and she had led humanity through 2 global crises before this one. When she finally addressed the room, her voice was calm. Earth would ask for an extension. They would tell the Valorans that the integration process needed more time to organize. They would comply on the surface, smile at their new masters, and do everything the Empire asked. And while they smiled, they would prepare. The request for extension surprised Commander Zeth. He had expected panic, perhaps even violence. Instead, the humans seemed almost eager to cooperate. They asked questions about integration procedures, requested details about labor assignments, and filled out every form the Valorans provided. Zeth reported to High Sovereign Thalrix that Earth would be easier than expected. The humans were clearly a weak species, quick to accept their place in the natural order. Thalrix was pleased. Another successful conquest for the Empire's history, but Zeth did not see what happened in the quiet hours. He did not see Lara Bennett meeting with military commanders across the globe, sharing her observations about Valoran vessels. He did not see scientists staying awake through the night, analyzing every piece of Valoran technology. They could scan. He did not see the families who held each other close and made silent promises. They would not live as slaves. Their children would not grow up serving alien masters. Whatever it took, however long it lasted, humanity would find a way. Ambassador Price stood before Commander Zeth on the 7th day, bowing his head in what looked like submission. He thanked the commander for the extension and promised full cooperation. Zeth smiled down at him with satisfaction. This was how the universe worked. The strong ruled and the weak served. It had always been this way and would always be this way. Humans were simply learning their place, Price walked away from the meeting with his head still low. But once he was out of sight, he lifted his eyes and allowed himself a small smile. The Valorans saw what they wanted to see. They saw surrender and acceptance. They did not see what was really happening. They did not understand that every bow, every smile, every act of cooperation was a mask. Beneath that mask, 8 billion humans were getting ready to teach the galaxy a lesson about underestimating Earth. Lavra Bennett stood on her bridge that night, looking out at the stars. The Valoran fleet hung in the darkness like a threat made visible. But Lavra was not afraid. She was counting ships, measuring distances, and planning for a future the Empire could not imagine. Somewhere down on Earth, in hidden rooms and quiet conversations, humanity was waking up. Not to accept their fate, but to change it. The Valorans wanted servants. They were about to discover what humans really were.